She said I'd embarrass her, that if I even showed up, I should keep quiet, wear something that wouldn't wrinkle, and, God forbid, avoid the spotlight. But then the host stepped up to the mic and said, "Tonight's entire gala was made possible by Natalie Brooks." And just like that, the room turned. "Hi, I'm Natalie. I used to be the girl who taped her science fair ribbons to the back of the fridge because they weren't ladylike. But last night, under that spotlight, they didn't see a disappointment. They saw the woman who built the stage they were standing on. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to get to know you a little better. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. That way, I can send you a special shout out. Now let's begin our story together." I found the envelope nestled between a coupon flyer and a real estate ad, the kind of envelope that practically whispered prestige. Thick ivory paper, embossed seal, my name in an elegant serif font. I knew the moment I touched it that my mother had something to do with this, even if she didn't sign it. Inside, the invitation was as theatrical as she was. "You are cordially invited to the Magnolia Women's Initiative Gala, celebrating the legacy of Southern women in leadership and refinement." My name was printed clearly near the bottom. So was the donor, NB Trust. She wouldn't have noticed. She never asked where my initials went once I stopped attending family brunches. The air in Savannah that summer hung heavy with jasmine and the kind of humidity that made your linen stick to your back. I hadn't planned on returning until Thanksgiving, but the envelope made that decision for me. I booked a flight, packed a green dress, and landed 2 days later without telling anyone. My mother's house hadn't changed. The shutters were still navy, the brick walkway scrubbed clean, and the front door gleamed like a showroom sample. She greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, her pearl earrings swinging slightly as she tilted her head. "Well, I suppose the board sent you one too," she said as I stepped inside. "Surprise," I replied, setting my bag by the stairs. The same stairs I used to sit on as a child, eavesdropping on adult conversations I was never meant to hear. She led me into the kitchen where a pitcher of sweet tea sat sweating on a silver tray. "They're casting a wide net this year. It's our biggest gala yet." I leaned against the counter. "Did you tell them not to?" She hesitated, then poured herself a glass. "I didn't think you'd come. It's a formal event, Natalie." "You mean I don't own enough sequins?" She sipped, then waved a hand. "Just don't wear anything linen, please. And no sandals. You know how the press loves a stray toe." I smiled, but not because it was funny. She had always had this way of managing me, guiding, correcting, editing, until I disappeared into her version of a daughter she could display. I used to fight it. Then I stopped fighting. I just moved 3 states away. That evening, after dinner had settled into silence, I climbed the creaky staircase to the guest room, my old room, stripped of posters and awards, replaced by neutral bedding and a stack of outdated magazines. I opened the window slightly and let the sounds of cicadas fill the space. Below, the garden lights flickered on automatically. My mother's roses were thriving, as always. I wandered back downstairs and paused near the living room doorway. The light was on. She stood facing the tall mirror above the fireplace, one hand gently pressed to her chest as if anchoring the words there. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady and smooth, "welcome to the Magnolia Women's Initiative Gala. Tonight we honor tradition, elegance, and the enduring pride of Southern womanhood." She paused, adjusted a curl that had strayed from her chignon, and started again. Elegance, pride, generations of grace. I watched her quietly, the way a person might watch a scene from an old movie, familiar, practiced, distant. She didn't know I was there. She was still rehearsing when I finally spoke. "Don't worry," I said softly. "I won't say a word." She turned, startled. Her posture stiffened just slightly before she caught herself. Then she offered a tight smile, the kind she wore like a pin on a blazer, ceremonial, detached. "Good," she said, smoothing her skirt. "That would be best." I didn't reply. I just nodded and turned back toward the stairs. On the hallway table, the gala invitation still sat unopened by her. She hadn't turned it over, hadn't looked at the name of the donor, NB Trust. But maybe that was the point. For years, she chose what to see. This time, I had chosen what to sign. And as I climbed the stairs, I wondered how long it would take for her to ask what those initials really stood for. Coming back felt like entering a well-kept archive of things I was never allowed to touch. The same floral wallpaper ran up the staircase, curling ever so slightly near the corners. The smell hadn't changed. Rose water, old books, and something sweet. Maybe pecan pie cooling near the back window. It was all familiar. It was all curated. But none of it was mine. My suitcase thumped softly against the edge of the guest bed, once my room, now sterilized into neutrality. The blue ribbons from my science fairs were gone. The framed photo of me holding a soldering iron at 13 had been replaced with a soft watercolor print of magnolias. Even the lamp had been changed, no longer the flexible one I'd used to read under my covers late into the night, but a stiff brass thing that gave off barely enough light to find my way to the closet. There was no welcome back, just the way her eyes paused on my dress when I came down for dinner. "Is that linen again?" she asked, setting down a plate of chicken and rice. "It breathes well," I said. She didn't laugh. Instead, she passed the rolls. The table was dressed in its usual Sunday best. White lace overlay, cloth napkins folded just so, the family's monogrammed silver out of its velvet-lined drawer. It was the kind of presentation that made you sit straighter, speak softer, and eat without scraping your knife. Mrs. Holloway arrived halfway through the meal, unannounced but not unexpected. She had the timing of a person who considered herself part of the family, but none of its responsibility. "Oh, Margaret, that pie smells heavenly," she said, bustling in with a breeze of lavender perfume. "Is that the young woman from the committee? I remember her from last year's youth banquet." "She's my daughter, Evelyn," my mother said tightly. "Natalie." Mrs. Holloway blinked. "Oh my, of course. You've changed your hair, haven't you?" I smiled. "Among other things." She laughed like it was charming. My mother didn't. Later, in the quiet of my old room, I unpacked slowly. I laid out the green silk dress I'd chosen for the gala, smoothing its folds over the bedspread. In the nightstand drawer, I found the old tea strainer Grandma used to keep, the one with the tiny dent in its side. It had been tucked away, but not thrown out. I brewed a pot of tea in her clay teapot, setting it on the windowsill where the morning light would hit it just right. A quiet act of rebellion. Or maybe remembrance. I poured myself a cup and sat by the window, feet curled beneath me. My laptop blinked to life. The gala committee's email waited, still unsent. I read it one more time. "Dear Committee, as discussed, I kindly request that the identity of the NB Trust donor remain private until the scheduled reveal. I will be arriving on site the morning of the gala. Please confirm receipt." I clicked send. A breeze slipped through the screen. Outside, the roses were blooming, red, full, perfectly trimmed, just like always. And then from downstairs, I heard her voice. Not her hosting voice, not even her public voice. This was the Margaret Brooks reserved for calls after a glass of wine and no audience to impress. "She'll probably come in that wrinkled dress again," she was saying. "God help me if she tries to speak. I love her, of course, but she doesn't make it easy." There was a pause. I imagined her swirling whatever drink she held, probably something clear and overpriced. "Yes, I know the board invited her," she added, her tone sharp and resigned, "but really, they invite all kinds these days." I didn't need to hear more. I reached for my tea and smiled to myself. Let her think I still took the bus. Let her think my dress came from a clearance rack. It made no difference. The entire gala budget, from the crystal glasses to the string quartet, had been covered quietly, efficiently, without press releases or applause, by NB Trust, by me. Sometimes, I've learned, it's better to let them underestimate you. That way, the silence speaks louder when the truth walks in. Nobody looked twice when I walked in, and that suited me just fine. The entrance to the Savannah Museum of Fine Arts was lit with warm, amber sconces and the low hum of a string quartet drifting through the atrium. Clair de Lune. I recognized it immediately. The notes curled softly in the air, delicate and drifting, like dust you could walk through. It was the same piece my mother once said was too moody for a girl. I'd wanted to learn it on the piano at 14. She'd insisted on marches and waltzes. Things that show discipline, she said, not drama. Now here it was, playing at her signature gala, and I was the shadow slipping through its notes. The guests had come dressed for a spread in Southern living. Seersucker jackets, silk shawls, the glow of antique pearls passed down and polished. Waitstaff in white gloves, balanced flutes of sparkling cider, and trays of shrimp and grits served in miniature mason jars. I stayed near the back, a glass of water in hand. I didn't need champagne to make an entrance. I wasn't here to impress anyone, just to be present when it counted. Near the buffet, I spotted Elijah, the caterer, whom I hadn't seen in over a decade. He looked up as I passed. "Miss Brooks?" he said, eyes narrowing with something like recognition. I smiled. "Elijah, you remembered." He chuckled. "Of course I did. You helped me unload boxes at the soup kitchen that summer I started this gig. Thought you were a volunteer until I heard you arguing about circuit boards with a priest." "Some things haven't changed," I said, and he grinned. In the center of the gallery, a tall floral arch framed the podium. Gold-rimmed programs had been laid at every seat. A photo of my cousin Tessa in her graduation robes from Chapel Hill was featured on the inside cover under the heading, "Young Southern Women to Watch." I watched my mother take the stage in a silver gown. Her hair was pinned perfectly, her smile calibrated to suggest graciousness without intimacy. She thanked the board, acknowledged the volunteers, then turned to the spotlight behind her. "And of course," she said, "we're especially proud of our next generation. One of them, my niece, Tessa Whitaker, just completed her first year of law school. Tessa, dear, please stand." Applause swelled. A spotlight found Tessa, her curls pinned and her teeth flawless. She waved modestly, one hand on her chest like a pageant queen mid-coronation. I clapped too, quietly. No one noticed. My mother didn't look in my direction once. Across the room, I overheard murmurs ripple through the crowd. "Have you heard who funded this year's gala?" Anonymous, apparently. Full budget. Someone said they flew in from New York just for tonight. Probably one of those tech people. They always keep things under wraps. I sipped my water. The condensation pooled in my palm, unnoticed. Then the music paused. The lights shifted. M.C. Lattimore, in a tuxedo with satin lapels and a voice smooth enough to butter cornbread, stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "before we continue with tonight's honorees, the committee would like to extend a very special recognition." I saw my mother's shoulders square, as if bracing for a spotlight she believed belonged to her. "This year's gala would not have been possible," he continued, "without the generosity of a woman whose impact on our region and beyond deserves far more than applause." There was a pause. He looked directly toward the back of the room, to the donor behind the NB Trust, Miss Natalie Brooks. Silence, then gasps. All eyes turned. My name flashed across the giant screen behind him in soft gold letters. I felt the air shift, tension, surprise, calculation, and then the spotlight found me. Across the room, my mother froze. I watched the color in her face drain just a shade too pale. Her hands clutched the podium. Her expression didn't change right away, but I knew that face. That was the one she wore when her expectations buckled under new information. I didn't rush. I set down my glass and rose slowly, smoothing the front of my silk dress. For 10 years, I'd let them think I was still figuring things out. 10 years since she'd told the board not to credit me for a scholarship fund I'd sponsored, said it might confuse the narrative. But this time, I was the narrative. "Dear friend, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I bet you can't guess what's coming next. But before we go any further, drop a 5 in the comments if you're still with me, because what happens next might just leave you speechless. I stepped forward, the click of my heels muted by the carpet, each step quiet but unmistakable. And somewhere in the back of the room, I thought I heard Elijah let out a low, impressed whistle. But I didn't turn around. This wasn't about who saw me now. It was about finally seeing myself, without asking her permission to arrive. I'd never been called a donor of the year before. Not in school, not at home, not even in my own mirror. The words sounded foreign when MC Lattimore said them aloud, like they'd been intended for someone else, someone with a stronger voice or a brighter smile. Someone my mother would have claimed at the podium with both hands and a headline-ready quote. But there I was, standing at the foot of the stage, as the spotlight followed my steps and the crowd shifted in their seats. I took the microphone gently, like it might break if I gripped it too hard. "Good evening," I began, scanning the rows of faces, not for recognition, but for steadiness. I'm not used to microphones, but I am used to something else, being underestimated. There was a quiet ripple of laughter, soft and polite. "When I was a little girl, I used to build things in the garage," I continued. "Towers out of toothpicks, motors out of busted toys. I didn't think it was special. I just thought it was fun." I paused and glanced at the edge of the stage. MC Lattimore gave me a small nod. Behind him, a large screen flickered to life. Photographs appeared. Black and white images of mobile STEM vans lined up beside rural school buildings. Kids in matching t-shirts huddled around soldering kits. A robotics lab with the words, "Liberty High, Innovation Wing" etched in brushed steel. A collective hush settled over the room. "I never expected to be here tonight," I said. "But if I'm honest, I stopped waiting for invitations a long time ago." From my place on the stage, I spotted a girl near the back, maybe 15, in a simple dress and thick glasses. She leaned toward her friend and whispered something. The friend looked at the screen, then back at me. "That's the lady behind it?" I heard her mouth, clear as a bell. It was the kind of moment that didn't need a photograph. It etched itself. I cleared my throat, not from nerves, but to hold the weight of the air still. My foundation, NB Trust, wasn't built to prove anything. It was built because I remembered what it felt like to dream quietly and alone, and I didn't want any girl to feel that way again. Applause began softly, like rainfall on a window pane, and grew into a full wave. Somewhere in the middle row, a woman from the press took notes, her pen flying. I caught glimpses of town council members nodding. Elijah the caterer was wiping his eyes with a folded napkin. And then, just for a second, I looked toward my mother's table. She hadn't moved. Her hands rested perfectly on the linen napkin in her lap. Her wine glass sat half full beside her plate, but I could see it. The small shift in her spine, the slow blink, the way her mouth pressed into a line thinner than thread. The camera hadn't panned to her yet, but I knew what it would catch when it did. I took a breath and finished. "Thank you for letting me stand here just as I am. That's more than I ever thought I'd be allowed." I stepped back, handing the microphone to MC Lattimore. The applause swelled again, standing this time. The screen behind me paused on a final image, a ribbon-cutting ceremony outside a community college tech center. I stood in the corner of the frame, nearly unrecognizable behind sunglasses and a blazer. Then the screen split, one half replaying the moment I took the stage, the other zooming toward the front rows. And there she was, Margaret Brooks, seated at the head table, a half smile frozen between performance and disbelief. For a heartbeat, the applause sounded far away. I wondered if she saw the projection of herself behind me, 10 feet tall and blinking, if she recognized that, for once, she hadn't curated the moment. The string quartet shifted into a different rhythm, a slow, wandering melody. Summertime. I knew that tune. I knew it the way a child remembers being corrected. Years ago, I'd asked to play it at my school's spring recital. My mother had wrinkled her nose. "Too jazzy," she'd said. "Improper for an audience of donors." Now it carried me off stage like a ribbon trailing behind a kite. I stepped down slowly, heels quiet on the carpeted riser, the scent of hydrangeas clinging to the air. But when I reached the floor and turned toward the table where she'd been sitting, her chair was empty. No purse, no shawl, just the ghost of where she'd been. A soft breeze from a nearby vent caught the edge of the linen napkin still folded neatly beside her untouched dessert, and I stood there for a long moment, not surprised, not hurt, just aware. Some silences say more than any standing ovation. Some silences are peaceful. Others sit across from you at breakfast and stir their tea like they're rehearsing an apology. When I stepped into the kitchen that morning, the light was already shifting through the curtains in long, quiet beams. The table had been set. 2 plates, 1 slightly chipped teacup, a jar of blackberry jam with the lid askew. The toast was cooling on a folded cloth napkin, and my mother was seated at the far end, spoon gently clinking against ceramic. She didn't look up. I sat down slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile arrangement of morning. The chair creaked under me, a sound that used to mean I was fidgeting, not listening, not ladylike. Now it was just a sound. I reached for the jam. Her eyes followed my hand but never met my face. We ate in near silence for several minutes. No small talk, no comment on the weather, just the soft rustle of the newspaper beside her and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then she spoke. "You planned that?" Her tone wasn't accusing, not cold either, just tentative, as if she were speaking through a locked door, unsure whether I'd answer or walk away. I spread jam over the corner of my toast. "You planned not to see it," I said gently. She nodded once, like she'd expected that answer. The clink of her spoon stopped. She set it down slowly, precisely, the way she always did with things that mattered more than she led on. "I watched the whole thing," she said after a pause. "Every word, every picture." I didn't reply. She turned her face toward the window, as if hoping for guidance from the magnolia tree outside. Its branches swayed slightly, catching bits of light. "I suppose I just didn't expect to recognize any of it," she added, "not because it wasn't good, but because I never let myself imagine you being the one behind all that." I looked down at my plate. A bite of toast had gone cold in my hand. I didn't eat it. She reached into the pocket of her housecoat and pulled out a small box. Worn velvet, faded at the corners. She slid it toward me. "I found this last night in the desk drawer." I opened it. Inside was a photo, soft at the edges and slightly curled. 10-year-old me, standing in front of a science fair poster with a crooked smile and a blue ribbon pinned to my shirt. I was holding a drawing of a small quadcopter, my first drone sketch. The ink had faded, but the lines were still clear. "I remember that day," I said. "You told me not to hang it on the fridge. We didn't have the kind of neighbors who understood that sort of thing," she replied. "It wasn't about you. It was about protecting you from being odd." I looked up then. "But I was odd," I said, "and I was fine." She didn't argue, just pressed her palm flat on the table like she needed to steady something. "I kept it," she whispered, "but I never knew what to say." Her voice cracked ever so slightly on that last word. It wasn't a dramatic crack, no tears, no trembling chin, just a thinning of sound that came from somewhere deep and rarely visited. We sat there like that for a long time. The breeze shifted through the open window. A cardinal chirped from the garden. The clock ticked on. Then she spoke again. "Can we try again?" I looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in years without armor. She was smaller than I remembered. Her eyes softer, or maybe just tired. I folded the photo and placed it gently back in the box. "Maybe," I said quietly, "but I think I'll need to see who you are when no one's watching." Her lips pressed together, not in resistance, but in understanding. Outside, a car passed slowly on the street. The world was still moving, still forgiving in its own quiet way. She stood and gathered the dishes. I let her. As I rose from my chair, I glanced back at the table. The box still sat there. Some things you hold on to, not to return, just to remember. You can build a home from silence, but it won't keep you warm. I used to think power was something loud, something claimed in boardrooms, announced in headlines, printed on checks. But this morning, as I stood in the gymnasium of a public high school just west of downtown Savannah, I understood it differently. Power, I realized, was just showing up and letting others know they could too. Dogwoods bloomed outside the wide windows, their white petals glowing against the fresh spring green. Rows of folding chairs filled the space where students usually played basketball. Banners hung from the rafters. One read, "The Delaney STEM Fellowship for Southern Girls, Dedication Ceremony." The stage was modest. No velvet curtains or spotlight, just a microphone on a stand and a lectern with a laminated logo. Still, the air buzzed with something real, something lasting. I walked to the podium in a pale blue shirt and slacks. No designer label, no sparkle. Just clean lines and calm colors. The only adornment I wore was a pair of small emerald drop earrings. Grandma's. The room hushed as I stepped forward. A few girls in the front row straightened in their chairs, eyes wide, notebooks in their laps. One wore a lab coat 3 sizes too big over her dress. I smiled and began. "I wasn't supposed to lead," I said, "but I was born to lift." No fanfare, just the truth. I spoke for less than 5 minutes about Mrs. Delaney, who had handed me a check for $25,000 and told me to prove nothing, just to build. About how this fellowship was named in her honor, not because she shouted, but because she saw me when no one else did. "And now," I said as I closed, "this space belongs to you." Applause followed, not thunderous, but warm and genuine. As I stepped back, a young journalist approached. She looked barely 21, her press badge still laminated from the printer. "Miss Brooks," she asked, "what changed for you? How did you get from there to here?" I thought about it for a moment. "I stopped waiting for permission," I said. "That was the first step." She nodded, scribbling it down quickly. A volunteer came up just then with a long white box in her hands. "Miss Brooks, this was just delivered for you." I took it carefully, the paper still cool from the delivery van. Inside, a small arrangement of white orchids sat nestled in soft greenery. Tucked among the stems was a card, handwritten in a familiar hand, "From your mother, with quiet pride." I didn't read it again. I didn't need to. I folded the card once and slid it into the pocket of my slacks, then handed the box back to the volunteer. "Would you place those near the students' table?" I said. "They'll know what to do with them." The final portion of the program continued. One of the mentees, a sophomore named Alyssa, gave a speech thanking the committee. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. Another girl read a poem she'd written about machines that could fly without permission. Afterward, as the chairs began to shift and the crowd mingled, a young girl in the back walked straight toward me. She was no taller than my shoulder and wore tennis shoes with marker doodles across the toes. She paused, then looked up at me. "Can I hug you?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. I knelt slowly, knees cracking a little on the way down, and wrapped my arms around her. She smelled like peppermint gum and sunscreen. "Thanks," she whispered into my collar. "Any time," I whispered back. We stood like that for a moment. 2 people generations apart, tied together by a bridge that neither of us had to build alone. When the gym began to empty, I took one last look around. The front row, where the press and board members had sat, was nearly cleared. Programs lay folded on the seats. A half-drunk bottle of water rolled lazily under a chair, and one seat, right on the aisle, remained unclaimed. No purse, no handbag, no shawl draped across the back, just a seat. And for the first time, I didn't need it filled to feel seen. I walked past it slowly, quietly, knowing that some spaces are meant to stay empty, not because no one showed up, but because you've already made peace with who never did. Sometimes, The seat they leave empty says more than anything they ever told you out loud. But as I walked past it that day, I realized I didn't need it filled to feel whole. In life, we don't always get the apology we hoped for or the spotlight we earned, but we can build something better, something lasting, when we choose to lead with quiet strength and open hands. Grace doesn't always arrive in the form of recognition. Sometimes it's the choice to keep showing up anyway. If this story reminded you of someone you've had to forgive or become, feel free to share your thoughts. I'd love to hear how you've learned to build your own table, too.